Hi, my name is Ben Hurd, and I'm a director of a company in Adelaide called Think Climate Consulting. My question's for David Noonan. Ideally, I'd have questions for all of you, but I may need to correspond. David, you lost me at the point where you cherry-picked a quote from a book, removed it entirely from its context, and twisted it to suit your own ends. That is precisely the tactic that we've seen employed in the ClimateGate affair, which has been 90% beat up, thrown all over the world from using that exact tactic. I despise that, and at that point, my vote simply on integrity grounds in tonight's debate had to go to the other side. My question for you, David, is why did you do that?
I think the quote's pretty well in context, and there are other similar quotes. For instance, the book discusses how they would use up, meaning reprocess, all the spent fuel on Earth, and states and wish, and still be wishing we had more. These are not the comments of a proponent who is concerned necessarily about the risks from high-level nuclear waste. It's rather a nuclear proponent's opportunism to wish to access more fissile material to facilitate more intended integrated fast reactors.
Next question, then.
I'm not sure whether I misread the invitation for tonight, but I actually came expecting to hear a discussion about whether Australia should have nuclear or not. And there was a very strong bias towards discussing the entire world, and I feel that Australia's situation is extremely different from France or the US or some of the other countries, particularly those that have a very large amount of waste already, which you guys would like to process in your Generation 4 reactor. So my question is for Tom and Barry. I'd like to know whether you believe that Australia needs or should have or can have nuclear, and whether it should be a Generation 2 or a Generation 4, or how you think it would fit for Australia.
You're Australian.
Yeah, sure. No, that's a good question. I think Australia will have nuclear power when the government decides Australia will have nuclear power, and the government, whoever it is, will decide it on a number of bases. One is when the public decides we need it, and the other one is when it's economic to do so. So right now, there's no economic imperative to move off coal. Until we get a carbon price, then there won't be an economic imperative. Will we get a carbon price? Don't know. It's not looking all that flash hot right now. So the alternative is to pursue renewable energy, which we can deliver here right now, to try and find ways to encourage energy efficiency, and to watch what happens in the rest of the world. So the emphasis was on the rest of the world because that's right now where it's going to happen. It's either going to happen in favour of nuclear energy or against it. We're not going to have much to do with that except through the sale of uranium. I mean, there are other sources of uranium, but we're an important contributor to the world market. But Australia's tactic seems to be, well, we'll just see what happens. And we may come out of it winning, we may come out of it losing, but I can't see us being proactive in it. Look, I would say I'm here ahead of the fleet behind me saying, hey guys, they're coming. Just be aware of it. I'm just here as someone to communicate what's going on in the world and to be aware of this. I'm not saying that next year Australia will start building its first nuclear reactor. It's not going to happen. But in terms of climate change mitigation, I can absolutely tell you that's a problem of the global commons. And if we can solve that problem globally, then we all win.
Yeah, 3 questions, 1, 2, 3, and then we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm Hubertus Jersman. I'm a medical specialist working at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and I'd like to put to the affirmative. The safety thing is everyone talks about some terrorist making a bomb or Ahmadinejad making a bomb. The question to you, which you can tell the audience in a minute, is how many grams of plutonium in a drinking supply will actually kill a 4 million citizen city? Yeah? This is poison. This is unsafe. The second is the human factor, or nature of human track record. And what I've seen so far from humans, especially humanoids in America, is not a safe track record. So I don't want any one of those to handle this kind of material. And finally, from a medical perspective, if I treat an alcoholic and humanity behaves like an alcoholic plundering human resources, completely out of control, if I treat that alcoholic, I give him rehab, whereas Mr. Blees wants to give him a drink. More electricity.
Well, I would say that there are any number of toxic substances that you could put in a water supply besides plutonium, and how anybody would be getting a hold of that plutonium when it's locked into a fuel cycle where it can't be handled, that's going to be tricky. That was polonium, actually. And it was in one single case, probably a KGB operation or something. There are a number of toxic substances in the world that don't have a half-life. The radioactive substances have a certain half-life, and admittedly, you don't want to inhale plutonium. Actually, if it was in your water supply, it probably would pass through your body pretty well. You just don't want to inhale it. As far as I can see, this is a spurious issue. I mean, it's not going to happen. Plutonium is not going to be out there in the hands of some terrorists. How are they going to get a hold of it? It's going to be locked in the fuel supply. And if, with the organization that we propose to create, with a group of scientists from all the major countries, that we're going to create this international control regime, it's about as safe as you can get. Now, how are you going to stop the spread of nuclear power? None of us can dictate that the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Iran, North Korea, for that matter, we can't just tell them, no, you can't have nuclear power. Nobody's going to be able to do that, okay? So nuclear power is spreading around the world whether we like it or not. Now, if we stay engaged and treat it responsibly, if we try to deploy the safest possible systems that minimize any risk of plutonium or other radioactive elements being separated out, that's the responsible path. Otherwise, it's happening helter-skelter, and if you want plutonium in your drinking water, well, that's the more likely way to do it.
If we can try and keep them to one question, we're not going to get round tonight, so try not to put 2 or 3 in if you can. And if you could avoid making personal statements, it would be helpful.
Well, we could note that the plutonium would simply get out of the integrated fast reactor fuel by conventional reprocessing. It only takes a country, an organisation or a terrorist group to subject that fuel to conventional reprocessing or an automated small hot cell. That's how you access the plutonium.
There is no terrorist group that has the capability to extract plutonium. It's a major operation. You have to build a great big facility to do it.
Well, the point is that the worst proliferators are not terrorists, they're governments. And what is often not known is that the Australian government made a serious attempt to build nuclear weapons quite some years ago. They started to build a nuclear power station at Jervis Bay, which we now know was for the joint purpose of developing electricity generation and producing plutonium. The documents from the Department of Foreign Affairs were all published by Richard Bronowski, who was a former Australian ambassador to a number of countries, an excellent book called Nuclear Fission, and he got all the documents from the department up to 1988, well past that period. So it's an extremely well documented book, and there are other books which also confirm it. No, it's governments we've got to be afraid of, including our own government. They're the proliferators, primarily.
Next question.
My name's Sue Gilby. I understand that uranium mining and the integrated fast reactors are 2 separate issues, but I fear that the talking about 4th generation reactors and it legitimises uranium mining. I fear that it was spoken about before that it was a cover for uranium mining, and in Australia we don't have the water to mine uranium, and if we continue going down this path that legitimises these 4th generation reactors, then we're saying uranium mining is okay, and in fact we're saying that we have to do it. For the good of the world, and that's just something that Australia, I don't think, can do and can afford to do with water.
I'll take that as a statement, unless somebody really wants to answer.
Well, I'll just say that if you want concrete and steel to build renewable energy plants, you've got to build a mine to get that iron ore and to mine the limestone as well. So no matter what energy technology we're going to deploy, you're going to have mining to supply those needs. Uranium mining is just another form of mining. John. Doesn't go away.
Given the capacity of the fossil fuel industry to prevent governments, particularly the US and Australian governments, from adopting any alternative to fossil energy. How confident are you, also given that the IP, intellectual property for the IFR, is American, how confident are you about the capacity to bring the system online within the time frame that you've nominated?
Well, I'm quite confident simply because of the discussions that are already underway between Russia and the United States and within the U.S. government. The Secretary of Energy, when confronted with the fact that Yucca Mountain was going to be closed and we had nowhere to put our spent fuel, was asked by the Senate Energy Committee, what are we going to do with it? And he said, well, we can build fast reactors and we can recycle the fuel and use it up in fast reactors. Obama's top science people know that this is an answer to the problem. So I'm quite certain that within the United States we can do the recycling, and also that there's support at the presidential level, both in Russia and the United States, to build the first fast reactor of this design in Russia. So, yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think the chances are very good.
In Margaret Dingle, Solar Energy Society, I've heard that the older breeder reactors use sodium as a coolant, and I've also heard that sodium is highly inflammable and is likely to blow up if it gets water on it. I was wondering if the Generation 4 reactors would be using sodium as a coolant. I'll also add a little question to Mark Diesendorf about the molten salts in the solar thermal things, whether there's any hazard of that type there. Thank you.
Yes, the integral fast reactor is a sodium-cooled fast reactor. So it would use sodium as a coolant because it's one of those substances which has got good thermal properties and is transparent to neutrons. So it can run a fast reactor. So it's an engineering problem. You have to ensure that the sodium doesn't come in contact with water to create an explosive situation. But that's an engineering problem which is easily solved. And you can have many precautions to make sure it's doubly or triply solved if you want, but the problem is quite manageable. If you look at the experimental breeder reactor, for instance, which was the exemplar of it, they didn't have any sodium problems in the 30 years that they ran.
I might also mention there was, when you build a reactor system, there's a science called probabilistic risk assessment, where you figure out all the potential problems and figure out how often you could, for instance, experience a core meltdown. And then this study was done for the S-prism reactor, which is the one that we intend to build. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission took a look at that and basically agreed that if the entire planet were powered with just these reactors, you could expect a core meltdown once every 435,000 years. Now, 18,000 years ago, we were in the grip of an ice age. So essentially, with the engineering that's already been done for these reactors, which sit underground, about 15 meters below ground, in an argon atmosphere with no egress for the coolant, there is no way for the coolant to get away. So as long as the coolant is there, it's proof against meltdown simply because of the laws of physics. So that's already been passed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and cleared. So it's extremely, extremely safe, sodium or not.
Well, can I add that there's really no basis for probabilistic risk assessment applied to fast reactors. There's only 300 reactor years or so of experience, and there's very little reactor years being generated now. So the probabilistic risk assessment that Tom mentions is applied to the conventional reactors. It failed.
Sorry,
No, it's not.
Sorry, it's for the S-prism reactor.
Well, look, there's no data. I really don't believe it as a former applied mathematician. I think it's just ridiculous on such a small database, to make predictions. Even with quite a large database, probabilistic risk assessment failed dismally with some of the early accidents at Browns Ferry and 3 Mile Island in the United States. It had to be considerably upgraded, learning from the accidents. Can I also say that this problem is not just an engineering problem. It's, as I mentioned before, it's an economic problem. Yes, you can make systems safer and safer at a cost. And what we're seeing with nuclear power is that even the most elementary attempts to improve safety are not being done, even if they add very small costs. Finally, to answer Margaret's question about the salts for thermal storage for solar thermal power, these are very common salts, mixtures of salts like sodium nitrate and sodium chloride, and they really don't seem to be terribly hazardous as long as you don't consume them in vast quantities, because then you'll get heart disease.
I'm trying to get round to people in order. There's a forest of hands, but you say.
Okay, my name's Keith Potts. I have a question for Tom. Tom, you said in your speech, and I heard you say it the other night as well, I believe, that the previous generation light water reactors burn a fraction of 1% of the fuel. And you said your integrated fast reactors burn 100%. Now, why do you need reprocessing if you burned all the fuel? And I can't actually believe that's true either.
Okay, what I actually said was they extract 100% of the energy available from the uranium, whereas the light water reactors extract about 0.6%. The reason that you have to recycle it is because as a fission product, as the uranium atoms and the plutonium atoms are split in the course of the reaction, you basically create new elements. And many of those elements act as a poison to the fission process, so that when you get too much of these nuclear poisons, you can't sustain the chain reaction. So about once a year, you would take a third of the fuel out. You would run it through a pyroprocessing unit that would be attached to the plant, and all of the long-lived nuclear waste, the long-lived elements in the spent fuel would be reintegrated into new fuel, and you would take out those fission products, or the vast majority of the fission products that act as nuclear poisons and that are only going to be radioactive for a few hundred years, and you would embed those in glass and store them on site for the life of the reactor because it's very small. So essentially, you're running the long-lived nuclear materials in and out of the plant about once a year. The pyroprocessing facility, by the way, for a 2.5 gigawatt reactor, which is an extremely large reactor complex, you would only have to process about 1 gallon a day. So, and the pyroprocessing is inherently really compact. You could build a pyroprocessing unit in a good-sized garage. So this is not some kind of gigantic facility that you have to build. This is a very small batch process. It would all be automated, and that's why you have to do the recycling. The light water reactors used today they're extremely inefficient. And so the type of recycling of fuel from a light water reactor is only the type that the French use to extract the plutonium, put it into some new fuel rods, and they increase the efficiency of the system from about 0.6% to about 0.8%. So whereas with the fast reactors, you can fission much more material and essentially utilize 100% of the energy. So I don't know if that did it.
As Darian Howells from the United Party, which is a new political party just being formed, listening to the proponents of nuclear technology, I immediately started thinking about the 1940s and the invention of computers and the enthusiasm with which they were accepted. It was the head of IBM who said that in the future the total world's computing needs will be satisfied by, what was the number, 5 computers? It does seem like this is a very similar situation. I guess the question is, how can we be sure that the argument of the proponents is not a purely faith-based argument?
I failed to get the analogy. I mean, computers got miniaturized, got more economic, and are used in every part of our life today. I mean, once the technology can be produced on a mass scale, then it can make a real difference, like computers did. And so, if someone has a failure of foresight 50 years ago for a particular technology, that doesn't mean that will always be the case. And for nuclear power, there have been failures of foresight There's no doubt about that whatsoever. I mean, there have been claims that it would happen much more quickly than it did, various reasons why it didn't, just like there have been plenty of solar Pollyannas who have said it will happen really quickly and it hasn't either. We've got to understand why and make sure that we can overcome those problems.
We can't predict the future at that point. And the renewables, they're proving themselves. We're guessing years into the future.
Well, no, I would disagree. Renewables are currently, non-hydro renewables are currently supplying about 1% of our energy needs, and nuclear is providing about 15%. It was interesting that Mark made the comment that nuclear power is a declining industry. Well, I would be interested to see whether he'd be willing to lay a wager on in 5 years' time we would be generating more or less nuclear energy than we are today, because I would be quite happy to make that wager.
So up the back, then I think there's one here, then there's some down the front, and we'll try and work that.
Thank you. To my knowledge, none of the speakers have formal economics degrees, so I won't go there. I don't have one either. But I did understand Barry's point that if theoretically you could make the IFRs cheaper than coal, then it's a snap. It would happen in years. In contrast, Mark's assertion, I'm led to believe just with a magic, you don't need it, with a magic wand, renewables are going to happen. I just like to better understand where Mark's coming from.
Well, I think it's mostly Mark's question, but I'll just jump in first because I got in first. No, the point is, great, if we could put a real price on the externalities involved with fossil fuels, fantastic. That's clearly the best way, the quickest way to get sustainable energy on the economic drawing board. But we can't do it. We keep on trying to do it. We keep on failing at it. We can't get a carbon tax here. We can't get a cap and trade. The negotiations at Copenhagen have just fallen over. China and India have said, forget about it, guys. We're not doing that. We're pursuing ahead. So that's why I said the only way we're going to get emissions reductions is to have these energy sources cheaper than coal. Not because it's fair that way, not because the world is a fair place, but because I'm facing reality. And that's the reality that we're facing.
Well, I don't think you are facing reality, Barry. I think the reality is that there are very powerful vested interests like the coal, aluminium, oil, iron and steel, cement, and other industries which are huge greenhouse gas polluters, which do not wish to see a change in the energy system. And they're particularly powerful in this country and in the United States. They're not so powerful in Europe. And that's why we're seeing renewable energy growing at a high rate, perhaps not solar photovoltaics in Germany, but if we look at some of the success stories, instead of cherry-picking a rather unreasonable example, what we're seeing is wind power growing very rapidly. Denmark, Germany, Spain, and other countries, also in China, as I've said, incredibly rapidly. In India, we see solar thermal power, large-scale solar thermal power, growing very rapidly in Spain, and they're growing rapidly because the governments have the right policies and because the coal industry isn't as powerful in those areas as it is here. And if you want to be realistic, we have to assess the situation politically. And the politics of this are, it doesn't matter whether Labor or Coalition is in government, they are basically having their energy policies and greenhouse policies written by these vested interests. And in my book, Climate Action, which you can buy outside, I explain how the climate action movement, the community, can move forward, exert very strong pressure on government, on industry, to get some change. We have a lot of success stories from non-violent action by social movements, right across the board. It can be done, but really it's our only hope in Australia to get anything done. Otherwise we'll be left far behind Europe and also China as they rapidly grow and take over the manufacturing for renewable energy industry.
Mark, the rate of growth issue, you know that's fallacious. I mean, if I gave you $2 and said I'll double that, you'll earn an extra $2. That's 100% growth rate. If I gave you $1,000 and said I'll give you 5%, you earn $50. Which one would you rather take? I mean, one of them starting off a completely different baseline.
What's happening is that when Barry says that renewable energy is only 1%, he's averaging over the whole world. Instead of looking at the countries where it is being done, which are growing very rapidly. As I said, wind power has been growing globally even 30% per year for the last 20 years, basically. At that sort of rate, it will swamp just about everything if it continues. And similarly, the rate solar power is growing in the few countries where it is getting proper government support and strong community support. These are the indications for the future. The success stories tell us what we can do, and averaging over the planet is like saying, well, you can't drown in a lake of average depth 2 centimetres.
Well, why did you average over the planet for nuclear power? You just said in your talk nuclear power only constituted 14% of global energy supply.
Because nuclear power...
So you can average for nuclear power, but you can't do it for renewables. Is that what you're saying?
Because nuclear power has been around for 50 years. It's about time it did a bit better if it was any good.
Oh, how long's wind power and solar power been around?
Not that long.
Let me get this.
It's totally inconsistent. Totally inconsistent.
That's starting to sound like a debate.
Let me get this straight, Mark. Hold on.
This is a debate.
You say that Barry shouldn't average everything out. He should look at the countries where these things are being pursued. And yet, when I talk about Germany, which has 80% of the world's solar panels, you say I'm cherry picking? How does that work?
Germany is in relative darkness for most of the years compared with Australia. I mean, that's relative. Much higher latitude. And you know that. I mean, you're just playing debating tricks. Germany is not an ideal country for solar power. It's pretty good for wind power, though.
But you were just applauding the renewable energy policies of Germany, but now you're saying they're idiots for building solar power in a dark country. Which is it?
Yes, we have a question.
Tom, as a former U.S. government employee, I have two questions for you, which is, I noted that you talked about the standard of living that we deserve and the standard of living that the rest of the world deserved, and I don't regard driving down to the McDonald's in a V8, a couple of tons of steel, as a standard of living that we deserve, all the rest of the world deserves. And that's the one thing. And the other is that since the United States government is the largest terrorist organization on the planet, in terms of the total number of people that they have killed since World War II, then would you really trust them to have a monopoly on a breeder system that made as much plutonium as that they wanted?
Yeah, that's a bit crazy for me. I won't go there.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm just a student at Adelaide Uni. This is a question for the negative side. I know that people have already said that we're looking more about the world than specifically Australia's future. But given that Australia is a fairly large continent, it's not densely populated. It's mostly empty space. What do you think? Do you think there's going to be problems bringing in renewable energy in Australia because it'll be more difficult to get decentralized power generation systems to bring the power to the cities effectively and to transmit power between the cities when there's fluctuations in energy production and need?
Okay, thanks for that. Australia has enormous renewable energy potential. We have far more potential than we could actually use in this country. We could export renewable energy. Once we start getting large-scale solar power stations up in the drier, sunny areas, we could be exporting power overseas, maybe in the form of hydrogen or making methanol. We're so blessed with sun and wind and geothermal and quite a bit of biomass too, and wave. We can do it. Australia, unlike Britain, which would have great difficulty in generating all its electricity from renewables within Britain. But on the other hand, Europe has the potential of importing energy from North Africa by transmission line. And there is now a very serious scheme in which some very big corporations are coming in to build solar and wind power in North Africa and feed it into the European grid. And that could actually be huge. And to me, that is much more exciting than sort of distant fantasies of Generation 4 reactors that don't really exist anything beyond the experimental stage. So yeah.
So the Sahara covered in mirrors, huge transmission lines going up to Europe, huge amounts of storage to cover it when the Sahara goes dark at night. That's reality, and our talk about reactors is fantasy.
Yes.
Speaking of...
Okay, thank you very much. And I think I'd just like to get you to thank the speakers, the people who did the setting up of the sound system, particularly this gentleman. I haven't met him, but he's been cantering up and down the stairs like a madman, and thank the organisers as well. Thank you.